Over the years, I've occasionally put forward the premise that homosexuality is caused by psychological scarring and emotional trauma in developmental years. And to test this theory, about 5 years ago, I made a video where I decided, without any forethought or planning, I didn't research these people ahead of time, I knew almost nothing about any of their backgrounds, but I decided to think of a random 10 famous gay celebrities, just the first 10 that came into my head, and then do a little bit of research into their early years in real time as I made the video to see if they fitted that hypothesis. So I was looking for things like absentee parents, abusive parents, broken relationships with parents essentially, domestic abuse, child abuse, unnatural early psychosexual experiences, bullying, exposure to pornography at an early age, and so forth. In short, I was just looking for some kind of trauma or brokenness that would be revealing itself very clearly in that person's sexuality. So in that video, these were the 10 celebrities that I randomly considered. They were Ellen DeGeneres, Elton John, George Takei, Rosie O'Donnell, Ricky Martin, Graham Norton, Tom Daley, Ruby Rose, Neil Patrick Harris, and Milo Yiannopoulos. And what I discovered, again, in real time as I made the video, was that 9 out of these 10 very clearly did fit that hypothesis. Ellen had an abusive stepfather who molested her and tried to rape her when she was young. One time when he was trying to get into her bedroom, she had to kick out a window to escape. Elton John's father rejected and abandoned him and his family when he was young, and this left a void of missing masculine love, which affected him his entire adult life and revealed itself in drug and alcohol addictions and suicide attempts and rage problems and just so many things. George Takei was molested by an older teen when he was 13 years old at summer camp. Rosie O'Donnell lost her mother when she was 10 years old, leaving her to be raised by a sexually abusive and emotionally distant father. Ricky Martin was sexually abused by his band's manager when he was a child. He was a member of a boy band called Menudo, and he was raped and sexually abused as a part of that. Graham Norton was bullied by other boys and he had no friends when he was growing up in Ireland. Tom Daley lost his dad when he was just a child, and his dad was 40 years old at the time of his death. And then not long after that, Daley came out as gay and started dating, wouldn't you know it, a 40-year-old man. Daley was about 19, 20, 21 at the time, so very clearly trying to replace that lost father in his life. Ruby Rose grew up without a father and was sexually abused. She was the subject of incest in her childhood. She tried to commit suicide and just had a very dark time in general. Neil Patrick Harris was the only one who didn't really fit this hypothesis. I couldn't find any real evidence of trauma in his childhood, although he was a child star. And in Hollywood, I wouldn't be surprised if he just hadn't spoken about it, because other child stars have spoken out about the culture there in Hollywood. And he did say that Whoopi Goldberg once propositioned him and offered him sex when he was just 15 years old. I don't know if that would be enough to do it, but that did happen. And then there's Milo Yiannopoulos, and this one is especially interesting because since I made that video 5 years ago, Milo has now come out and affirmed this theory. He was sexually abused as a child, and he now recognizes that that played a role in his same-sex attraction. He now counts himself as being ex-gay, and he's talked about setting up a center in Florida to help other gay men confront the truth about this in their own lives and to heal from their trauma in a more healthy way. So here's a clip of Milo talking about that.
Your main question, it's taken me 36, 37 years to begin to break free from what I now recognize to be the symptoms of the fallout from childhood experiences. And I think the central problem with trying to explain to people who have accepted the born this way propaganda, and I've always known it was that, but the central problem is explaining to them how it can be that something that they feel is a natural part of them can in fact be a cluster of symptoms from childhood abuse or from childhood trauma, let's say, trauma. And I think when I really confronted myself with that reality, things began to happen quite quickly for me.
It's very interesting. You mentioned about the childhood traumas and so on, and you yourself experienced it is one of the most common traumas of people with same-sex attraction, that they were abused as children, or
in addition to overbearing mothers, which might be another component of my own etiology. That seems to be the two common factors, right? The two commonalities are absent fathers or negative male role models and overbearing mothers. plus some kind of traumatic psychosexual event.
Mm-hmm.
These two things seem to come together to produce this. So yeah, I think that's right.
Now, people are complex, so this is not a linear thing. This is not an easy formula here. We can't say that if X happens, then Y will always be the result in every single human being. You get adults who are molested as children, but who are still straight as they grow up. So we all process things differently. We all have different circumstances, a variety of influences and things which impact upon us as we grow and develop. But it does seem very clear that there's a strong link between early childhood trauma and same-sex attraction in adulthood. Indeed, it's estimated that around half of gay men report having been abused as a child, while up to 85% of lesbians report having been abused. I feel like more and more people are beginning to recognize this link now, and the most powerful stories are undoubtedly coming from within the ex-gay community, from people who recognize that this was a factor in their own same-sex attraction. Indeed, the reason that I'm bringing this whole subject up again right now is because I received a message on the subject just a few months ago. The message was in response to that previous video that I made 5 years ago. And it read, "Amen. True in every sense of the word. I identified as gay for over half of my life. I'm 28 now, and it wasn't until earlier this year that I realized that it came about from multiple circumstances, with the biggest one being the lack of proper bonding with my father. I grew up with an alcoholic, verbally abusive stepdad who often put me down, which really affected my confidence and self-esteem. Couple that with the bullying that I experienced growing up, as well as the loneliness throughout my teenage years. Also, being homosexual is not all sunshine and rainbows like the leftist media makes it out to be. It's a lonely, miserable, depressing life. In fact, most of my bad experiences came from other gay men, the guys who were supposed to be my so-called allies. There's no such thing as love in the gay community. Gay men are all about sex, and most gay couples, including those who are, quote, married, are in open relationships. This delegitimizes the sacredness and sanctification of marriage and its true purpose, the creation of human life." He then goes on, "My homosexuality either came about after the abuse or some circumstances played out before then. Rest assured, you were not born that way. Religion today isn't being used as a weapon towards LGBT folks. Quite the opposite, actually. Even if you take God out of the picture, there's no denying that the gay lifestyle is destructive and harmful. I know many gay men who are absolutely miserable and who've turned to alcoholism to fill that void. A few others have died from AIDS. The world needs Christ now more than ever. Ask yourself, do you really want to suffer the physical and mental consequences of this lifestyle, or do you want to choose a different path and one that will give you real fulfillment in this life and the next? The answer is obvious." He then finishes by saying, "The cause of homosexuality can include one or multiple factors. In most cases, sexual abuse is the number one cause. Couple that with other factors, and most of the time you end up with someone having same-sex attraction. You can deny it all you want, but truth is truth, and there is nothing that will change that." I think these testimonies are really worth listening to. Ex-gay man Joseph Sayambra has been talking about this link for a long time, and he says very insightfully that gay men enter the lifestyle while in their late teens or early 20s. At that age, there are plenty of opportunities to express oneself and to experiment, and this newfound power can be heady at first. For instance, you were once the kid that no one wanted on their team, or the boy with the overly critical and unloving father, or the scared child that someone touched. Suddenly you are with people who have largely gone through the same thing, though almost never admitting it. Instead, everyone plays out the trauma of their youth in a bizarre ceremony of reenactment as healing. Now you can dance into the throng, feel their warm bodies next to you, and imagine that you are finally part of the group. Older men who want you to call them daddy ask you out, and that moment of shame and embarrassment from your childhood doesn't seem strange or horrifying anymore, because you can live it over again and draw pleasure from it under what you think are your own terms. Although I observed a genuine affection between gay men, it was akin to the instant camaraderie which indelibly links all horror survivors. For this was the characteristic that I witnessed in every same-sex couple, a bond of suffering enkindled by their shared memories of a childhood gone wrong, failed parents, tales of bullied boys, and lonely nights spent crying out for love. Sayambra tweets about this quite often, and he tweeted recently saying, "The majority of adults who identify as gay, lesbian, or bi are the survivors of childhood trauma or abuse, and instead of receiving life-saving care, we are labelled by society, and the suicide rates among us go up. This is not an identity issue, but a public health issue." Another said, my stepsister is gay. She was raped when she was 5. A good friend of mine is also, and she was molested at a young age. I definitely think it plays a part. Another said, many gay men have said the same or spoken about some form of abuse, but it's widely ignored. Another linked it to sexual kinks in general, saying that for the same reason an adult may enjoy spanking in a sexual way after being punished with spankings as a child, or an adult may be attracted to abusive partners if their parents growing up were abusive to one another. Childhood trauma often leads to adult desires, sadly. An ex-lesbian says, I was molested at the age of 4 and became what was referred to at the time as an extreme tomboy. Today it's body dysmorphia. I wanted to be a boy. Luckily, I have healed so much and I'm so glad I kept my womanhood and I'm now a mother. More research needs to be done. And then finally, this backs up the words of ex-lesbian Jackie Hill Perry, who says that abusive men in her life left her hating the weakness of her femininity and wanting to be a man as well. She says, born with an inherent disposition to sin mixed with fatherlessness, molestation, and limited to no examples of trustworthy men, led me into a lifestyle of homosexuality. It was a way of life I willingly embraced. My style of dress and behavior was somewhat indicative of my personality. A girly girl could never be used to describe Jackie. An aggressive tomboy was more like it. Therefore, the girls I attracted were typically everything that allowed me to become what I thought I wanted to secretly be, a man. I always saw men as being something to envy. They seemed strong, powerful, in control. Femininity, or the skewed view of it that I held, seemed weak. Part of my embracing masculinity and rejecting femininity was my own way of protecting myself from pain that I believed men were capable of subjecting me to. After all, that's what my father did to me. That's what I saw men do to my mother. That's what I witnessed my guy friends do to the women that they claimed to love. All I knew of men was that they used their manliness as a means to inflict pain, and us women, us weak beings, were target practice. Now, why does it matter to hear all of these stories? Why have I taken so long to read out all of these testimonies one by one? Well, because in our soft virtue age, the prescription for homosexuality today, which has almost been enshrined in law now, is to just always affirm it as being good and natural. That's who you are. You were born that way. God made you that way. We just want to affirm your homosexuality. You don't need to change anything. That's who you are. We want to affirm your homosexuality. But what if by affirming their homosexuality, you are in fact affirming a symptom of their brokenness and trauma? That's what these testimonies ask us to consider and to confront. You know, another symptom of brokenness and trauma might be alcoholism or drug addiction. So if someone came to you as an alcoholic or a drug addict, are you really helping them by saying, I just want to affirm your addiction. You were born that way. God made you an addict. That's just who you are. Here, have some cocaine, have some heroin. Would you really be helping them? No, you wouldn't. The real help comes when you recognize that there is a wound there that is causing this, and you seek to bring healing and health into that wound so that person can be made whole again. And that's why testimonies like these are really important and why Christians should listen to them and hold fast to the biblical teaching on this issue, which is very clear, by the way. There should not be any confusion as to what the Bible says about homosexuality, rather than falling in with the current worldly ideas, which is what many Christians are doing, and which are in fact very confused. We don't oppose homosexuality in order to hurt or harm anyone. In fact, it's the complete opposite. We oppose it so that those who are in its grip might be released and liberated from the effects of their brokenness and their trauma, so that their wounds may be healed, so they can find health and wholeness. We're almost on the verge of not being able to say stuff like this anymore, but I do think it's important that we do say it for the good of everyone involved, especially homosexuals themselves. It's at least something that we should be investigating and researching a great deal more, and the words of these ex-gay testimonies are something that we need to consider and confront as we do so.